Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Thank you for joining us on another edition of Illinois Rising. I'm Dan Proft, morning talk show host on Chicago's Morning Answer, AM 565 to 9 a.m., Monday to Friday with Amy Jacobson. And co-hosting with me this week is Pat Hughes, who is the co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And Pat, Chicago Democrats are really intransigent when it comes to bad economics. And the case in point this week is State Representative Will Guzzardi, who's Democrat from Chicago, kind of a Bernie Sanders type, has introduced legislation to raise the state minimum wage to $15 an hour, so people earn a living wage. Now, interestingly, the timing of this, you had an announcement from an engineering firm called Miso Robotics this week that they've created Flippy, a robot capable of flipping burgers, frying chicken, and cutting vegetables. So I wonder which way some of these fast food franchises are going to go with Flippy the robot or the $15 an hour mandated minimum wage employee per Will Guzzardi and Chicago Democrats.
Yeah, Dan, we've talked about minimum wage before. This is, Democratic governance where the folks are trying to, it's a popular concept. People think it sounds good. It makes the politician feel good. But the reality of it is, that when you raise wages, you raise the cost to employers. That they're going to find a way to either pass those costs along to consumers or they're going to cut their workforce, and neither of those consequences are good.
For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Don Boudreau, who is an economics professor at George Mason University, where all the great economics professors are. It's fascinating. You've got Walter Williams there. You got Tyler Cohen there, who also does a great blog called Margin Revolution. And Don Boudreau does cafehayek.com, which is also must-reading for people interested in economics-oriented public policy. Don, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here.
So on the $15 minimum wage proposal in Chicago, like in other big cities controlled by big government Democrats, what should people understand when politicians are doing this in the interests of the person trying to struggle and earn a living wage?
Well, the first thing you should understand is that when you force someone to pay more for something, they'll buy less of it. So if you force employers to pay more for low-skilled labor, they're going to buy fewer low-skilled laborers. You're going to destroy some jobs on the lower rung of the ladder. And what that'll do in turn, of course, is cause people who would otherwise get jobs to be without jobs, and to be not only without the income that they would get from those jobs, but in many cases, more importantly, be without the opportunity to gain job experience and on-the-job skills, which will prevent them from getting better jobs in the future. The claim, look, I think a lot of minimum wage advocates are genuinely sincere. They really believe that the minimum wage will improve a lot of low-skilled workers, and that's why they advocate it. But a lot of minimum wage supporters are, in fact, not so pure in their motives. The minimum wage, by eliminating some low-skilled jobs, some jobs for low-skilled workers, oftentimes that creates opportunities for higher-skilled workers. And so the people who advocate the minimum wage, it's a combination of people with pure motives but misguided understanding of economics, along with people whose motives are not so pure. They want to get rid of the competition that's posed by low-skilled workers on high-skilled workers.
Well, right. So my contention with this always is, well, look, if you could just make somebody's salary, just establish it by fiat, then why so stingy? If $15 an hour doesn't impact employment, then why allow people to only make $30,000? I want people to make a lot more money than that. I want people to make as much money as they can. Let's set the minimum wage so that everybody make $50,000 or $75,000 or $100,000. Why so stingy at 30?
That's generally a good argument. Most people who support the minimum wage, the logic that leads, or the illogic that leads them to support it, your argument is a perfect reductio ad absurdum. It should work. There is, I should say, an economic theory under which a minimum wage would not destroy jobs, but it's a very, very implausible scenario in the real world. And under that theory, a slight rise in the minimum wage might work, but a larger rise would, in fact, destroy some jobs. The theory, and this is the only plausible way this is the only theoretically plausible way that a minimum wage would work, is if employers, McDonald's, Walmart, hotel chains, of low-skilled workers had what's called monopsony power in the labor market. That is, they are monopoly buyers. And you can show theoretically, if that situation exists, and if you just set the minimum wage just right, then everything will work out fine for low-skilled workers. The problem is, of course, there is no way that the real world, as we know it, is filled with monopsony power. McDonald's competes with Burger King. It competes with local mom-and-pop restaurants. It competes with Walmart. They compete with Target. They compete with Motel 6. They compete with lawn care services for the services of low-skilled workers. Employers of low-skilled workers do not have any monopoly power in hiring these workers. Given that, there is no way, even in theory, then, that raising the minimum wage can do anything but destroy jobs for some low-skilled workers. The people who advocate, the economically uninformed people who advocate for the minimum wage, they are indeed subject to the criticism that you just raised. They believe that you can set wages by fiat. And if that were true, then you're right. Why stop at $15? Why not $150? Why not $1,500? There is no logical rebuttal to that claim. And of course, people see instinctively that such wages as $150 an hour would be too high. What they don't see, for some bizarre reason, is that wages of $15 are too high for workers who cannot produce at least $15 an hour worth of value for employers. And that's the bottom line. If a worker cannot produce $15 an hour of value for an employer in terms of that employee's output, then no employer is going to hire that worker. That worker will remain unemployed, period. There's just no other way. There's no two ways about that fact.
So, Don, why then, is it because it makes them feel good? Obviously, you've just very articulately laid out the arguments for why this minimum wage increase, why it doesn't work as an economic theory. If there's no real basis other than the monopoly circumstance that you just described, the goodwill advocates, we know why the bad will advocates advocate for it, right? Because they're bad people. They want to get some sort of political gain. But the folks who are advocating it, are they doing it just because it makes them feel good, or they're sort of have a cognitive dissonance regarding their feelings versus the logic of it? How do they articulate that, and why?
I think it gives them a moral high, and they don't bother to think seriously about the economics of the matter. It doesn't take a lot of thought, but they don't bother to give any thought to it at all. I believe in their worldview, they see employers as being big, fat, rich people who are sitting on piles of money that they don't know what to do with, and these people who advocate for the minimum wage also believe that there's a given number of jobs. And it's such a simplistic view that they think, well, if the state imposes a higher minimum wage, that all the employers will be able to do is pay those higher wages out of these piles of money upon which they are sitting their fat butts, and the workers will get more, and the employers will have slightly less wealth. That's how they see the world. They do not. The advocates of the minimum wage do not bother to think through it beyond the most immediate first step. Everyone can see. A 2-year-old child can see that if you force person A to give more money to person B, then person A will have less money and person B will have more money. But even a 2-year-old child can see that if you keep forcing person A to give money to person B, person A is going to try to stop having any relationships with person B, and that's what happens in the case of the minimum wage.
Well,
When
the frustrating thing too is, I mean, in addition to this caricature of everybody who's an entrepreneurial capitalist as the monopoly man, that's frustrating. But the other thing that's frustrating is that people it's the triumph of ignorance over their own experience. I mean, are you making today the same amount of money you made with your first job? Of course you're not. So we look at this statically, or so the advocates do statically, $15. So at least they're making something, and they can make $30,000 and raise a family. But they're going to make $15. They're going to make the minimum wage or whatever it is for a period of time, and then they're going to be assessed. And then if they're performing well, they're going to move up, just like you did in your career. I mean, so that this kind of suspension of your own experience is frustrating too.
That's exactly right. These people have a very static view of the world, and you know, if your ideology is that you really want to help the poor, then you have to have a whole lot of poor to help, and you don't want them helping themselves, and you don't want to believe that competition in the market without any guidance from bureaucrats and academics. You want to believe you don't want to believe that. You want to reject claims that the market is going on its own to help poor people, and so your mind closes off to asking the kinds of questions that economists ask about legislation such as minimum wages. Your mind closes off to seeing anything beyond the most obvious first stage of what happens when government intervenes. I confess, at the end of the day, I can't quite understand it. If you really do want to help poor people, then you should be interested in thinking deeply about these, or at least more deeply than these minimum wage advocates seem to think. But I believe they get such an emotional charge from thinking themselves or feeling themselves to be morally superior. We're fighting for a minimum wage, and those people oppose it. That's sufficient. They think that, you know, they feel good. They know their morals are pure and their motives are pure, and that's it. That's the end of the story. And then when people like you and me and others, and there are many, who come along and point out that there are these unintended consequences from minimum wage, most obviously greater unemployment for the very workers that you're trying to help, they reject that. They close their minds off to that, and they think that we are somehow immoral, and that they retain their morality by closing their minds to economic analysis.
He is Don Boudreau, Senior Fellow at the F.A. Hayek Program at the Mercatus Center, and he is on the free market Mount Rushmore over there at George Mason University with Walter Williams and Tyler Cohen. His must-read blog, cafehayek.com. Don, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.